Hello, friends. This is the AlphaList podcast. I am your host, Toby. The goal of the AlphaList podcast is to empower CTOs with the info and insight they need to make the best decisions for their company. We do this by hosting top thought leaders and picking their brains for insights into technical leadership and tech trends. If you believe in the power of accumulated knowledge to accelerate growth, make sure to subscribe to this podcast. Plus, if you're an experienced CTO, you will love the discussion happening in our Slack space where over 600 CTOs are sharing insights, or visit one of our events. Just go to alphalist.com to apply. So, welcome to the AlphaList podcast. I am your host, Toby, and today I am talking to a bus-driving unicorn. It's Daniel Krauss, the Chief Organisational Plumber at FlixBus. Daniel, very happy to have you here. Can you tell us a bit more about your title?
Sure thing, Tobias, and the Alpha folks. Good to be here. Well, I mean, originally CTO, CIO, whatever in the tech regards was written there, just did two things. First of all, it was not proper, as we have a VP engineer, for instance, and formally he's kind of the CTO. And I do not want to steal titles just because only the C-level itself, so the management board, in our case, uses the C. And also, you know, I took responsibility for customer service for some time, even operations. In the meantime, I own HR, so people in organization. And what I like as much as technology is working with people, working for people. So all that people topic. And that means you keep on making sure the company as an organization, as kind of a system, works. And in order to do so, well, you do nothing more than plumbing all day long. And I thought, yes, eventually it's a little bit funny, but also it's actually what I'm doing in both tech regards as well as people regards.
So maybe we have one thing in common. So I once did like one of those personality tests. I don't know how it was called, and it actually said that I am good in taking different roles in an organization. Would you say that this is also one of your strengths, or?
You know, it depends on the role. I don't think I would be a good finance officer. And if it's heavily related to Excel and PowerPoint and not the business itself, but, you know, those kind of business rules and tools, mainly sheets and docs and presentations, that's not what really drives me. I'm curious, and therefore I'd agree with what you said. But I'm especially curious about technology and product, and even more about organizational topics and people itself. And if this is related, I don't care so much what the exact role looks like or is named for.
So I would already have guessed that when I read your subtitle on LinkedIn, work hard and be nice to people, right? So you like working with people.
Exactly. That's what it is. I even have a sweater at some point in time. I'm not quite sure whether it was Vistaprint sweater or one of the others. I designed my own sweater, which exactly says, work hard and be nice to people. That's what it is.
Okay. But you're also a nerd.
Real nerds would say, well, not really. I mean, how nerdy can you be? Myself, I like nerds, and I would consider myself as a nerd. I at least used to be a nerd. I mean, when I started all that, I started very, very simple with some alpha computers, monochrome displays when I was 5, and started with Turbo Pascal and these kind of things. Started to obviously assemble my own stuff and put computers together and programmed here and there. After that, well, and after finishing school, I decided not to do real computer science because, you know, I don't know, math in school, it was kind of nice, and but not what I really loved. And apparently, before I started studying, the computer science universities came back and said like, hey, do you want to take a math course in the summer break? And I'm like, are you ridiculous? I mean, this is summer break. So I rather worked in the summer breaks and took then business information systems in German, Wirtschaftsinformatik as a major. So something between, the business context and IT. And therefore, I kind of lost a bit the nerd gene, I think. After that, in the first jobs in the automotive industry, there was still a touch point with pure tech programming stuff. But that was only a bit of when I actually really, really did engineering. Later on, Microsoft was tech consulting. So this is blah, blah, as always. And obviously in the early days of Flix, I had to program. But if you ask anybody in the organization, I think everybody is happy when I stopped doing that. And eventually they really looking back to my last commit and say like, God damn, finally it's out of the system.
But is there still something alive in FlixBus, that like some line of code that you initially created?
I don't think so. I mean, what I liked most was the configuration. In these days, you'd call it DevOps, site reliability engineering piece. So that was really what I enjoyed most. And back then, still everything was on Hetzner, and not because I'm personally living in Nuremberg, just because it was the cheapest solution. And I think all that kind of configuration stuff went away when we finally moved into AWS. So I doubt that there is any line of code still living in a system.
And you didn't, like in AWS, then introduce Kubernetes and get yourself familiar with that, or?
A little bit in terms of playing around, but not, in any mean of, hey, I really must contribute on that level. I just don't think this is where I'm best. I think I'm a very good translator between the actual real nerds, all the people I admire, and many of them work in Flix Tech, and all those business folks, dealing with PowerPoint and Excel. And I think in order to do that well, you need to have a proper understanding and need to have the roots in the nerd world. But you also have to admit where your strengths are. And, I'll lose any play against a proper nerd in any, in any dimension. So when I lose games, I better don't start them.
Okay. Can you maybe elaborate a bit on buses? I mean, why do you do that?
In terms of how many axles? No, just joking. Funny. That's a coincidence, basically. Andre and I, one of my two co-founders, aside of Jochen, know each other forever. We went to school together, started playing volleyball together. And when I was more of a nerd back then than I am now, we both did an internship close to Stuttgart. And he was wondering, like, hey, do you do all that programming stuff and, doing network configuration and all that, shit for free? And I'm like, yeah, I like that. That's just cool. I like doing that. And he's like, okay, this is nuts. I make you an offer. You keep on doing what you do. I just increase the customer base. And then we asked for, I think it was 80 euros an hour and then split. And I said like, yeah, I mean, why not? That's fine. If I can continue what I'm doing and I get even something for that without taking care, we have a deal. So that was when we had our first kind of IT company, which we sold, I think in 2007 or 8. And then, I started being over in the US, in the meantime, also in China, and then at Microsoft. And only when we kind of rejoined in Munich, we started thinking of, hey, why not restarting our entrepreneurial journey? Yes, Microsoft and Jochen and Andre back then worked at BCG, great, but it's kind of golden Ferris wheels. You're trapped and other people tell you what to do. And in that investigation, we discovered lots of things. And it was just an accident that we ended up with buses, because back then the former legislation that was the Liberal Party and the Conservative Party. They said they want to open up that bus market. I mean, back then we didn't have any FlixBuses around here in Germany, while Greyhound obviously was already in place in the US as an example. And then Germany started, France followed, and the long distance bus market got deregulated. And Andrea just called and said, hey, this market is huge. We just have individual car traffic and the trains, Deutsche Bahn as means of transportation, no alternatives. In other markets, there's billion-dollar markets in terms of long-distance bus markets. So we start that and we bring whatever the 21st century tech, software, a good, lean, customer-faced play together with mid-sized bus operators. And that's what we're doing. And then I said, like, yes, if I keep on, doing what I like to do, pretty same answer than back in 2005. I'm all in. So I didn't care too much. And what actually drove us are two things. First, the market itself. It's just transportation is a huge market, and there will be also in terms of megatrends quite some adjustments and changes. Just take autonomous driving as an example. And we really were looking for something real. So yet another pure software play, starting from software as a service, which is from a valuation point of view good, but that is not what really appealed us. And not even talking about NFTs or metaverse, all cool stuff, but we wanted to have something real, something tangible. And therefore the buses fitted quite nicely what we were looking for. And then we started over.
And back then when you started as CTO, how many questions did you get from others? You do buses, right? Why do you need a CTO? How often did that happen?
Almost 100%. I mean, imagine the first tech conference. I started going mainly because of the talent, just to attract people. I mean, I came there and you started the conversation, as you pointed out, Tobias, and people were like, hey, do you have vouchers? I'm like, I'm not here to, give away vouchers. I'm here to attract you to join us. And like, yeah, I know FlixBus. If you give me vouchers, I'm all cool. But what the fuck should I do at Flix? I'm a data whatever magician. And it's like, you guys do buses. I'm like, yeah, not really. The way we do buses and the reason why we are able to offer what we offer is almost only the underlying platform. And that took quite a while to explain it properly. So we at least earned some respect in the tech community. So almost everybody asked exactly the question, why the fuck, what are you CTO for? And if you have vouchers, all cool. Beside vouchers, I don't need anything of FlixBus.
So what do you do apart from issuing vouchers then in your tech stack?
So, issuing vouchers is also serviced, by the way, independently. And there are many more. I mean, in the meantime, we have a pretty decentralized and decoupled system. So I don't like microservices too much. I think the micro is debatable, but we have independent services. We over time just decoupled our monolith and used for now self-contained systems. If we build new services, it starts even more independent from tip to toe. So from a composite UI perspective on top till an individual database on the bottom, and people can eventually decide what technology they use if there's a handful of them, just checking off. If we talk about languages, still mainly it's PHP, Java, a little bit Scala, obviously Python in place. And from an architectural point of view, I pointed out already, we're almost only on AWS, a little bit Azure, and wherever the interfaces in the Microsoft world is, Power BI from a dashboarding perspective, we use some Azure components. And in between, you pointed it out earlier, we started to use Kubernetes quite early. And I think the Kubernetes decision, I supported. I didn't take. That was our former VP engineer. That was one of the key elements which really helped us to scale across almost 40 countries in the entire globe, because Kubernetes and the Dockerization on top of that, this is secret source. It's not a secret how that works, but this is really what accelerated us from a product and tech perspective, and really gave us the power to individualize services, product components, and have a certain level of freedom within the teams to really, as fast as possible, move on what the customer needs are. From a database point of view, there's still quite some SQL regional database stuff, MySQL, for instance. We trialed here and there graph databases, Neo4j, for instance, because the search is relatively interesting from a graph point of view. But at the end, it was always faster and more cost efficient to stay with rational compared to graph databases. What else? We have some kind of offloaded components in the buses, as we offer Wi-Fi, and we obviously also have to have a certain connection to understand where the buses are and if they're punctual and all these kind of things. We started looking into, if you would be an investor, I'd obviously say AI. At the end, it's certain
blockchain.
No, blockchain not, but NFTs, with AI coupled, whatever. So whatever is during the valuation. Joking aside, so some machine learning components so pricing algorithms to really look into demand and pricing and capacity management on the one hand. Some linear optimization algorithms in terms of the schedule planning. Then some NLP in terms of the Alexa components and voice processing to make sure we don't have to offer in each and any language a human to interact, for instance, with our drivers. That's just not scalable. So some in the broader way AI components, even though I hate the just we do AI thingy. What else? I don't know. I mean, that's the rest is pretty straightforward. We wrapped all the DevOps pieces in our foundation domain and call that FlixOS. So each product team really can start working on actual product code without dealing with all the underlying stuff. We leverage AWS organizations, so we have also full accountability and not only telling the teams, hey, I really you build and run the system and but also they now have the transparency and the accountability how much cost they produce in AWS. So they by themselves really start looking into optimization of spot instances and these kind of shit, and not just running the big machines 24/7. And then it doesn't make sense whether you have a data center or being on AWS. We almost entirely got rid of Rabbit as a messaging system and mainly moved into the world of Kafka for different reasons, because it's a little bit more scalable. You have more options in terms of how you connect services, more asynchronous, but there's also quite some pops up stuff still going on. And in the meantime, we went over and also tried to leverage embedded AWS services. So AKS as a Kafka example, and not only just installing everything on top of EC2. But nevertheless, if you look into what we use as a data lake, that's pretty simple and straightforward. S3, just to dump stuff. And on top of that, we really had to pull quite some things together because that was random, and then decided to go with Snowflake 3 years ago, I think. One of the first larger customers of them in Germany. And yeah, so that's broadly, so across the entire small FlixTech universe, what we look at if we talk about our tech stack.
And what would you say is your secret sauce in the tech stack? Like, what is the very special thing that no one can ever copy? Is it the sheer complexity of the overall thing, or is there like one particular piece where you say this is our masterpiece?
I think if you look to the foundation, simplified spoken, how we really implemented Kubernetes and Dockerization and what I mentioned as FlixOS. That is the level of automation and which gives the freedom to the teams to really look into where the actual value of certain product lies. That is masterpiece. That's something I'm really proud of. Obviously, I'm also proud of all of the individual products the teams came up with, and that's totally independent. Whether it's just the app, which is as good as some pricing algorithm. But as the foundation is important because that independently of each product gives the teams that kind of freedom they need in order to be super fast. I think that could be our secret sauce.
So your secret sauce is then the fact that you embrace autonomy.
From an organizational point of view, I'd clearly say yes. Maybe because I'm such a bad engineer, or because I really like to jointly work on prospering organizations and make sure people work well together. That to me only can work in a high level of autonomy, and therefore that's how the organization is built. Almost no hierarchy. It's really totally independent and autonomous teams, which just have to sign off to some underlying governance rules, but very, very rare. And the rest, they do whatever is needed to satisfy their stakeholders and ultimately the customers. And I just see myself as not only the chief organizational plumber, but also the one who is always on for sparring thoughts to support them and to make sure there's nothing in their ways. And that works.
Okay. And how did you get into that? I mean, where did you see that this could kind of be working? Working model.
Couple thoughts. So first of all, we started as anybody starts. You want in the beginning, also from a tech perspective, be as fast as possible. So time to deliver, time to really be at the spot where the revenues and the customers are. That's important. It's not that important that you have the prettiest architecture and super services and, service contracts and SLAs. It's just get that shit working. Better done than perfect. And what happens? Well, you end up in a monolithic structure, which is fair until some point. And we hit that point and we got slow. And in order to decouple that, we had a bunch of initiatives in certain projects, and it just didn't work. And at the end, I figured that you could reverse Conway's law, which says your piece of software kind of always looks like the organization. And that means I knew after a couple of discussions with our brightest and smartest techies, I knew how the software is supposed to look to cope with the challenges ahead of us. But it didn't work to get there. And then I just changed the organization with the belief that it will, sort it out itself. And we had obviously a couple of external coaches. I talked to the Spotify folks, looked at Zalando back then, Palantir, and some others who were a little bit ahead of us. And initially, what we did is we put all the, back then, 100 techies together in one room and did some game and sorted out how the new products could look like eventually in a distributed kind of independent way, and where the techies really wanted to go. So we call that team self-design event. The funny piece of the story is we had an external coach who suggested that. And I said, awesome, let's do that. And after it worked, well, he said hey, Daniel, did I ever mention there was no other company I know who did that exercise with more than 3 teams, maybe 4, and not the entire tech org at once? I'm just saying because of business continuity and stuff. And you're a smart ass mother, because obviously if you would have told me before, maybe I had taken a different approach. And so we did that overnight. And then that independent journey started. And we are continuously moving back. We called that the Flix journey or FlixTech 1.0 back then. In the meantime, we're at FlixTech 2.0 because we scaled that. So we have now more than, way more than 40 product teams. And we clustered them into domains from a domain-driven design approach. And the domains are very much mirroring our business. So there's a finance domain, there's a marketing domain, there's a revenue/pricing domain, there's a network planning domain, blah, 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 blah. And if those domains are larger, containing more than whatever, let it be 2-3 teams, but eventually even 7, 6, 8 teams, then, some super senior folks craft a domain leadership team, and we have some domain CTOs and domain product owners. And that level is what we call FlixTech 2.0. That was something we introduced after that team self-design event where we started the journey, the decoupling itself.
Is that then also a hierarchy, or?
It depends. Functionally spoken, I'd say yes. Because you have to have a certain seniority level to really become, for instance, a domain technology officer. Dissimilarly spoken, it's decoupled. We really look into, having decoupled career paths, where you can really start earning seniority and also get some of those exposed roles as an individual contributor, or you can decide to become, for instance, just a disciplinary leader, an engineering manager, people engineering manager, or domain lead, and that's a side track decoupled. They just own the entire organism and make sure it prospers, it works, kind of like I do, but they don't have the last call on tech decisions. That's what, for instance, our domain technology officers have, and there's a bunch of them. Those are the most senior folks. Maybe it's 6, 7, or 8, and they, together with the VP engineering, they make the calls. They just write down the rules our teams have to apply. The disciplinary folks and I, we just make sure the organism has everything, so it's not nurtured properly, like our both little kids.
Interesting. And how autonomous are the teams then? I mean, you mentioned written rules. Are the teams also able to influence them, or?
Yeah. So that's basically, one organization, one domain has certain needs, and the rules are pretty simple. When we look back into the language topic, it's only important that there's just more than one guy or girl being capable of one language. So because obviously, if you don't really look into microservices per definition, and you have just someone, you have a bus factor, and therefore it's 3, 4, 5 people or an entire team, and then they can come up with a new language. This is how Scala, for instance, in the revenue management got introduced. These kind of rules, and that's how it works. And then there is kind of request for changes. We call them, I think, Flix improvement something with all fancy abbreviations. I got lost. And then those domain technology officers come together and decide. And obviously, each techie is represented by one, and that's a role. So it's not necessarily democratically elected, but you volunteer, and if you're not well respected, you just, it doesn't work. So there is nobody but the teams represented by seniority to really suggest the rules. And at the end, those domain technology officers and the VP engineering just come together and say, this is how it looks like. And then there's, you can basically anytime call for an update.
So would you call it autonomous teams or empowered teams?
Good question. It depends on how you define autonomy. I mean, it's not that they can 100% just randomly do what they want. Besides what we technically just discussed, there's obviously also a budget constraint. And last but not least, there is the stakeholder and ultimately the customer constraint. So it's like it has to be crystal clear that we are a transportation platform coping with our vision to bring green and smart mobility for everyone to experience the world. And that means if there is no FlixLabs or Hacker Day in their domain, I encourage our teams, or if you are like pinpointed, they just must deal with that kind of environment and eventually cannot come up and say like, hey, we've come up with a new baking AI automate, comes up with the best baked rolls in the hemisphere. Nice. But outside of Flix Labs, I'm afraid that will come to life within the Flix universe.
Okay, good. So you care about the customer.
Well, I mean, at the end, that's the one who decides whether the company is continuously growing and prospering or no.
And if they want baked rolls?
Then I come back to the FlixLab idea in terms of the super AI baking automate, and then it comes to life anyhow.
Well, okay. How do you do? I mean, I can imagine like with like really moving buses, you have kind of very long cycles in terms of like from testing something or from like the idea to like seeing it live.
Why do you think so?
How do you do? Well,
I mean, we don't produce buses, right? So it's like
you don't produce buses, yeah, but you obviously need to do all the tour planning and everything involved. So, and you need to move real things. So I think it seems to be like something where you are potentially like a bit slower, not in terms of rolling out your app, but until like, I don't know, you have the idea for trains and then at a certain point.
Trains is a prime example. So for buses, we could, change anything within, let it be 24 hours, which is quite important if you run into a pandemic accidentally.
Yeah.
And in terms of releases, we have CI/CD, so that works continuously, almost on a daily basis. I'd set across average, but we don't use that if we do not have to. Coming back to the schedules, people want to have reliable schedules. They want to really understand when a certain bus comes at your stop. So that means we, at the end, in standard environments, don't change schedules too often. There's a winter schedule, there's summer schedule, and some adjustments. And it's also one of the more challenging things in terms of linear optimize, because there's so much regulatory attached to that, which you have to cope first. So you can not only let the algorithm do, because many of the suggestions coming out of the machine are not coming to life because regulatory just says no. And obviously, it's also not the same regulatory, independent of the country and the city. So it's just a regulatory mess. I mean, we're happy that they opened up and deregulated. That was the starting point. Without that, FlixBus would not be here. But it's still heavy regulated. So, and therefore, that's the actual downer or slowing effect rather than having actual assets. They don't, they're not as painful as the regulatory.
Okay, so sometimes you even have to use the fax machine still, right?
That's like, no kidding. That's what it is. I mean, we mimic fax machines here and there, and you can obviously, do that on a software level. But the receiving end is literally here and there an actual fax machine, and that's no joking.
I can imagine. Like a few days ago, did you see that that posting of someone who did an open source tool to actually mimic a printed out signed PDF? I can imagine that this is like similar in your space, right?
It's wherever you really have to deal with the old world, regulatory administration and stuff. Sometimes it's really a value to understand their processes and mimic them properly, because that really gives you an acceleration. I mean, people, and that's an anecdote though, some people I hear have a trustworthiness challenge with the mRNA vaccinations because it was that fast. And woo, I mean, how can that be proven? The acceleration of most of those processes were not that they skipped steps. It's just they really forced, in the US, for instance, the administration to work 24/7 and are always on to answer their questions and get back and forth and not necessarily wait for a written mimic printed out email to get answered throughout certain administration processes 3 weeks later, but actually use these fucking 3 weeks to continue R&D on the vaccinations. So it's not so much on the company's side, but quite some acceleration happened in these kind of R&D processes on the administration side, and they just eventually
paralyzing processes and so on. Yeah, obviously.
And that's true for us as well because transportation still is heavily regulated.
Okay, but you're pushing heavy against that, I guess. I assume.
We push as heavy as you can push to not break it, because you still want to be not necessarily the nice guy, but a well-accepted guy. Because if you overpush, you just get a no, independent of fax machines or printed out mimics. And no for us means, there's certain processes. If we apply for a new track, that could be accelerated to whatever, 24 hours, don't know. But there's currently a process which says it's okay that it takes 4, 6, even 8 weeks. I don't know the exact number. So if you continuously work together jointly with the regulators, that you end up at the first step in 5 days, that's fine. Maybe I have an idea to really come down to 2 hours. If I push that in, I eventually will wait those 8 weeks. They can let me wait. So, doing it just the Zuckerberg way, move fast and break things, is not what works well with the officials and the regulators.
I think even for Zuckerberg, it sometimes stops working, right?
Yeah, that's what I read as well.
So, one thing I we briefly touched, how big is your tech org now? So you said 40 teams. Is it 300 people or more?
Yeah,
or?
Approximately. It's I'd say 270 something. That's kind of what it would be, including not only the pure engineers at any kind, but also the product folks.
Okay, and how did you bring it to that level, making buses sexy? I mean, how did you do that for engineers? I mean, you must be attractive as a company.
The rollback in terms of empowerment and autonomy, what we touched earlier. B, some underlying things we even quickly touched base earlier in terms of leveraging cool new technology with that empowerment and the autonomy to make the company better and to serve our customers with pricing optimization, bidding engines, and these kind of things, which you would not look into from the outside, or looking to database technology like graph databases, these kind of things. And you must admit, we in good times, eventually serve hundreds of million people annually, and we do that from the Syrian border in Turkey to Vegas, LA in the US, and in Brazil. We do that not only in buses, but also in trains, which comes with other cool new stuff. For instance, automated check-in with some, picture and image recognition stuff. So it's smarter than what our competitor offers, where you have to have a seat on a butt on a certain seat. And also from just the pure SLA facts. This is across the time zones. It's just 24/7. That stuff has to work. It's not like, hoops, e-commerce site is down and eventually it's a stock keeping unit and you order the shoes 1 hour later. That's not how it works if you have paraturable goods running 24/7. And that's obviously something which is, I think, interesting for techies, because it's just an enterprise kind of system.
But techies have to know, right?
Techies have to know. That's true. That's the reason we talk, not only, but also why myself and especially also VP Engineering, our domain technology officers go to conferences, really partner up also with AWS itself. Some folks started talking with Google around Kubernetes and things like that. So I try to really encourage our folks to not just do the nurture in the basement, but go out and tell the great stuff they're doing.
So you do a lot of employer branding to attract people then?
Not enough, obviously, yet, but we're trying and increasing.
Okay. You mentioned you're not like a pure nerd anymore. You wouldn't consider yourself a nerd anymore, but I know those moments when you discover something new, which is like technical, maybe a tool, and you just like have glossy eyes and just want to tell everyone about it. What was your recent, like, was there a recent discovery where you said, okay, this is possible, okay, that's crazy, would have discovered it way earlier? Was there anything you discovered recently?
The fun fact is, and I think quite some of my senior techies hate me for that, Jochen and Ray and myself, we also invest here and there and just try to support the ecosystem. And there I have the chance to look into some cool new companies. And then I eventually drop them into FlixTech and say, like, hey, is that just me liking that and finding it cool, or is it just actually cool? And the last tool I'm hoping for a proof of concept within FlixTech, because I was really impressed, is called Lytics. Super complicated. L-Epsilon-T-I-C-S. And it's some, it's kind of like Click or Tableau 2.0, more integrated and really easy to use, with an actual result of meaningful data. That's something, if you are really large at some point in time with all that distributed kind of product teams and therefore distributed certain pieces of data, that's really powerful and eventually is a good add-on on top of our Snowflake. So Lytics. Let's see if I'm just surprised because that really appealed me and the founders did a great job, or if the FlixTech nerds sign it off and then it's FlixTech approved and not only Daniel finds it cool kind of approved.
Only Daniel approved. Okay. Yeah. Any like crazy recent learning you want to share with everyone you went through, like tech related, not tech related, people related potentially?
A recent learning, which is something we all know from the early days of, but it recently really popped up. On the people level, no compromises. From a product and tech perspective, compromise is fair. You can try out, you can iterate. On a people level, no compromises. If it doesn't feel right, it's probably not right. And then just don't even try. And that's as true for techies as for anybody else. And for techies, it's particularly because there's that ongoing decision, do I look for someone who's the most awesome techie? And it's okay if he or she's a little weird from an interpersonal interaction kind of level. Or if it's okay if it's only 90% the greatest techie alive, but 100% cool to work with, having a beer together. And it must be the second. Because as long as everything we do is a team effort, and at least for Flix it is the case, this is just beating the highest edge of technical expertise. And yeah, so it just recently, like days ago, really popped again into my mind because I eventually accepted a compromise where I knew in advance that'll end. And it ended.
Okay, so focus on team and cut cords early, you would say, right?
Very, very early.
Yeah. I accept that and can feel the pain with you. Then I still have like as a closing question, still have a little surprise for you. So your co-founder Andre, he actually recommended me that told me that there's like an unreleased staging version of your FlixBus app, which has like a hidden Easter egg in the time picker. And in the time picker, you can actually like pick a time from the past, and then you just go there. You just immediately travel there, and we're now traveling to the year 2010, when you were just working as like a TAM, a technical account manager at Microsoft. And we now observe yourself for a while. You had like little less gray hair in your beard, yeah, and stuff like that. And you now have the chance to whisper something into your young self's ears. What would it be?
Follow your gut and start the journey. I think beside minor decisions here and there, and that's okay, there's nothing I regret. It was just the right decision to co-found a company, and back then, because you're mentioning Microsoft, I would be lying if I would not have been hesitating and questioning. It's a great job and it's a cool company, but ultimately, I got nudged. I nudged myself. Eventually, even it's because of some of my weaker areas. I have a hard one to say no. Maybe I just said yes because I wasn't able to say no to Andre. At the end, I've somehow followed my gut, and it was totally right. So, yeah, basically, maybe it was the secret voice Toby and I today whispered back to 2010.
Maybe, yeah. Maybe it was us. So, Daniel, thanks a lot for being my guest, and hope to talk to you soon.
Louis, thanks for having me.
Yeah, enjoy your day. Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to the AlphaList podcast. If you like this episode, share it with friends. I'm sure they love it too. Make sure to subscribe so you can hear deep insights into technical leadership and technology trends as they become available. Also, please tell us if there is a topic you would like to hear more about, or a technical leader whose brain you would like us to pick. AlphaList is all about helping CTOs getting access to the insights they need to make the best decisions for their company. Please send us suggestions to cto@alphalist.com. Send me a message on LinkedIn or Twitter. After all, the more knowledge we bring to CTOs, the more growth we see in tech. Or, as we say on AlphaList, accumulated knowledge to accelerate growth. See you in the next episode.